Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. On Fridays, we talk about the product owner role in Scrum. We talk about patterns and anti-patterns that relate to ours and the team's collaboration with the product owner. And we've also put together a course to help you navigate that relationship. There's 18 modules, nearly 8 hours of tools, techniques, videos, handouts, presentations you can use to help you and your team work better with your product owner. The course is available at bit.ly/coachyourPO. All lowercase, all one word. That's bit.ly/coachyourPO. And now, on to the show, the Product Owner Show. Hello everybody, welcome to our Friday TGIF episode, this week with John Albrecht. Hi John, welcome back.
Hi Vasco, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. It's the fifth time today, and we have a very interesting topic to discuss. It's interesting for me because I happen to think that the product owner Scrum Master relationship is a make or break, a critical aspect of a functioning Scrum team. So let's dive into the product owner, and let's start with what might have been potentially the worst product owner anti-pattern you've witnessed.
I think the anti-pattern, the anti-pattern. I'm gonna throw a curveball in here. The anti-pattern is a Scrum Master thinking there's a bad PO. I think that's the anti-pattern. So the fact that someone is good or someone is bad, or a team is good or a team is bad, I think that is the anti-pattern. Because when you think like that, you're thinking in a Taylorist kind of way, and you're not going to get out of it. It's a sense that you've sort of gone too far almost, and you're not acting as a servant leader or a leader who serves is probably a better way of saying it. You're not acting as a leader who serves, because you can't help and work with folks if you think someone is bad or someone is acting in a bad way. It's very difficult to sort of empathize with their position. There's always reasons for things. So I think that's the anti-pattern.
Let's unpack that a little bit, John. I really like that curveball, by the way. I think there's a lot to explore and a lot to learn from that. So let's do that a little bit. What I hear you say is that when we project some value, whatever that is, good, bad, appreciative, non-appreciative, abrasive, communicate, whatever. When we project that onto the people we are working with, we run the risk of not being able to see their other characteristics that might be superpowers, that might be skills that we can then amplify and make them shine, which is at the end of the day what we're there to do. Is that what you mean?
Yes, yeah. And I think when you use the word project, that's interesting because it's talking to projection and shadow. When we project badness on others, it's often a sense of the thing, the unseen Johari window stuff that we don't see in ourselves, that we're then projecting onto the people around us, and we're seeing them as bad because we're not looking at what we can do differently in the situation. And yes, when you do that, you can't help. It creates division. It creates drama. You are setting yourself up as the persecutor, and you are identifying a victim who is, in this case, a PO, and that is not. That's drama within the Scrum team. I think a Scrum Master needs to know their own personal boundaries, but they need to see things as inherently good and possible, to call things out, but not see someone as bad. Yes, there could be bad practices, but there's usually a wider system that's causing that, and we need to understand how it feels from that other person's view and what we can do to support and help that person without helping them, obviously. Find out what they need and then be available to them. So yeah, I think it's that sense that, oh, my PO's bad or not, doesn't know what they're doing, or, well, okay, so what are you going to do about that? What could you do about it? And how can you see the world from their point of view?
There's one thing there that, it just came to my mind as you were describing that perspective, that for Scrum Masters, it's a very difficult line to thread. This invest in helping versus step back and let people take ownership of their own, their own productivity, their own collaboration, their own skills, right?
Yeah.
And for me, that's actually from what you described, there's also one of the balances that we need to strike between wanting to help, but at the same time being divested enough so that we don't feel emotionally invested in other people's change.
Yes.
Right? Because we can't change anyone, right? People have a hard time changing themselves, let alone external triggers for change. But we can be there to help when they are ready. So,
Yes.
and for me, that's what comes to mind is the necessity to always thread a fine line between pushing and stepping back, and then, or as system thinkers would say, probing and then listening or sensing what happens.
It is a fine line. And I think this is why it's important that the Scrum Guide's changed from servant leadership to leader who serves, because I think and this is just my opinion, I think it's acknowledgement of that fine line. I think as a Scrum Master, it's not your baby to a certain extent. You are a midwife to the situation. If we're going to take an analogy, you are a midwife to the whole situation. It's not your baby. You're available and you're supporting and you're working with, but you're understanding what level of involvement you need to do, but you're working through other people. And that requires you to know where that line is. And I think the line has been written about over a long time. It's like dead Scrum Master. It's knowing when you're going to push the door and when you're not going to push the door. And that's a personal decision. And you need to be thinking and reflecting, probing our questions, and then thinking where the line is and where you're going to go with it. I think it also is you need to think about why you're doing what you're doing. What's your motivation as a Scrum Master? And also, are you putting in less than 50% of the effort? You don't want to be going too far. You sometimes want to go a little further, but you want to be putting less effort than the people that you're working with. So you want to be available, but you're not leading them. They're leading themselves. They're empowered adults. They're members of a self-organizing team. It's their work. You are facilitator to that. I think the other aspect of this is contracting. And we talk a bit about contracting in Agile, but it's not a major topic. But I think a lot of Agile is about contracting. We have working agreements. It's a contract. It's a contract between ourselves. We have a definition of done. That's a contract of what done means. We have planning. We're contracting what we think we're going to forecast and the goal we're going to achieve. We have a retrospective. That's a contract to ourselves about what we're going to do differently. And I think really clean contracting, where we're talking and exploring what we want to have happen and agreeing between ourselves what that means and what that looks like is really important. And I think as a Scrum Master, we're facilitating those contracts.
And we're also making those contracts, right? Because our relationship with the team and the product owner follow a certain contract, which is very often unspoken and unwritten, but it does make sense to at least bring some of those topics up. Like, for example, what we were just discussing, dear product owner, I see that when you are not available to the team very often gets stuck with questions they don't get answers for. How could we help the team get those answers faster or, in a timely manner, whatever that might be? Let's make an agreement, you and I, how we are helping the team.
Yes. So what do you think? What do I think? What do you want to have happen? What would you like to have happen next? And then what do we agree to? Again, it's that empathy and thinking from other people's points of view and finding out what that other person needs or wants. You talked about probing and asking questions and finding that's what we're trying to do. And then if we can write something down, maybe that's cool, but maybe we don't need to. It's just a verbal contract. It's something we're agreeing to, and then we hold each other to account on it. But I think that relationship between a Scrum Master and a product owner is about the two individuals understanding each other and understanding where their responsibilities end and accountabilities end and where the other person kind of starts, and coming to an agreement. So, I don't think there's a bad PO in that. People are doing things, and we just need to get better at the contracting and understanding each other's and what we want to happen.
Absolutely.
I'm waffling a little bit here.
No, but I think that's a good point, right? The contract, sometimes it's, often is implicit, but sometimes it needs to be explicit. All right, but let's move on and hear about the opposite. Great product owner. What does that look like in your experience?
A really kind of visionary, engaged individual who's working very closely with stakeholders, balancing all their different needs, building enough backlog, available to team, talking with team, listening to everyone, a great listener, and almost like judge. Is this one more valuable? Is this more valuable? And is really keen to defer things down the backlog and go, well, yeah, that's not valuable. We're not going to do that. Why would we do that? That's just waste. And is sort of laser sharp on sort of ordering based on value, but also listening to customer feedback, inspecting what outcomes and what was the outcome of what we did and how users have responded to that, and willing to explore different ways of working and lets the team get on with it to a certain extent, but it's available to the team, always available to the team when the team wants. And yeah, I've been there a number of times, and it's a really, really good place. But I think you can grow to that position. Any team, I think there are organizational constraints, but any team can get to that point where you're at that place, and it feels really good.
So one of the things, of course, for us as Scrum Masters that we need to learn is how do we help product owners get to that level of engagement, working closely with stakeholders, judging priority, and so on. Because at the end of the day, what you defined, or what you described for us, it's like a super person, right? With superpowers. So how do you work with the product owners you work with to help them get there?
It's yes, it is, but no, it isn't. And it's why I created that Scrum Builders Retro. There are levels of where you can get to, and the organization and the limits within the organization dictate how far you can go almost. A product owner is best placed to understand the stakeholders and how transparent backlog can be and how they can work. But when you dig in, when you really understand the situation, you might discover that actually that nirvana of what could be is actually not wanted or needed by the organization and the teams. They don't want to go that far, and there are bigger issues or bigger things within your organization you want to work on. So how do you get there? You work with the organization, you listen to what the product owner and what the team are saying, and you're very careful. It's back to this line again. You're very careful and you understand what doors you can push and what conversations you can have with folks outside of the team to understand what directors need and what the wider organization needs and why they're doing what they're doing. And then with that work, you can then maybe move a little bit closer. Simple things like changing the funding model is probably has the biggest effect on teams. And why is the funding model how it is? And who can you talk to in accounts? What can we do differently? So I think one of the greatest successes I had was changing the funding model. So it wasn't a project model. The team still had a project code, but it was topped up on a quarterly basis. The team got a pot of money on a quarterly basis to do stuff, and the product owner for the business, and we did stuff. And that just released the team to do what was most valuable. So it was using the existing organizational structure to create a team or build a team that was released to do it. So it's the things outside the team often that stop the team. But that stuff as a Scrum Master you can do. It takes courage and it takes care, but it's who can you talk with and who can you listen to, and then, but it's not about getting your own way and forcing that. There are legitimate reasons why things are how they are, and you need to understand and listen to those folks and then work with them to, well, how can we kind of change this slightly? And how can we maybe run an experiment? We don't have to change it. We're not throwing it all out in one go, but is there a small experiment we can run? What can we do? And again, I'm saying Scrum Master can do that, but team can be involved in that. So these are things that we can come out of a retro. A team was very likely come up with an idea, listen to the team, listen to the product owner, and work with the wider business, and then try and make that happen very, very carefully. without stepping too far across the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Funding models are a super important topic for us, especially Agilists. There's an episode here on the podcast with Maret Lanti and Rami Sirkia, where they talk about what they call lean and agile financial planning, which talks exactly about that. How do we finance the work? How do we fund the work? And what impact that has on the organization. So definitely a very important topic here for us. And of course, it directly affects what work the product owner can do, because it's completely different to give a predefined list of features to a product owner versus telling them what business they're in and what the business goals are, and then letting them do their work, which is prioritize, listen, get feedback, work with the team, work with the architects, work with the testers, work with the customer relationship people, and try to get to as much value as possible.
Yes, yeah. It's the system. The temptation is to leave that as is, but a Scrum Master works with the organization. It's easier in smaller organizations to do it, but what levers do you have? Kind of what informal network can you do to make some of those things happen? Yeah, it's tough though. It's really tough in large organizations.
Absolutely. But definitely worth looking into and learning more about. Hey, John, we're getting close to the end. It's been a pleasure to have you here this week. Where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Probably the best place is LinkedIn. I'm relatively active on LinkedIn. So search for John Albrecht on LinkedIn. It's got lots of things coming up. Yeah, you can get access to Scrum Builders on there. I'm also doing a series of training events exploring Scrum Guide 2020 using metaphor. We're calling it Scrum Lake, where we explore Scrum through a metaphor of a lake, a submarine being a Scrum team, artifacts being a map and a scroll and a treasure chest. So we're doing that kind of every so often on the evenings. So if you want to learn a bit more about Scrum Guide 2020 in a different way, I'll make it visible on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, just link up with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the simplest way.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll definitely put the link on the show notes so that people can find your LinkedIn page. And thank you very much, John, for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you, Vasco. It's been a pleasure. I've loved speaking with you this week. Thank you.
One more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast is over, but there's a lot more we have to share. We have developed our own membership site where you find a community of active and engaged Scrum Masters. In this site, you get access to exclusive content and get to interact with us, your podcast hosts, as well as the best Scrum Masters in the world. Join us at scrummastertoolbox.com/podcast and keep this podcast free of advertising. See you next week for one more week full of Scrum Master tips and tricks. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.